Across the Anatolian highlands, the horizon ripples with ancient stone walls, collapsed courtyards, and the skeletal outlines of towns that once thrived against windswept hills. The earth bears witness to their presence. Foundations of long-lost homes, shards of painted pottery, and tools carved from obsidian that gleam as though freshly knapped. Yet beneath this weight of evidence, one silence grows unbearable. There are no cemeteries. Cities that must have teemed with thousands of inhabitants reveal no burial grounds, no mass graves, not even the scattered skeletons one would expect from famine, war, or plague. The paradox is stark. How can a civilization leave behind fortresses, sanctuaries, and intricate roadways, yet not a trace of the people themselves? Some believe erosion swallowed the remains, that centuries of wind and flood dissolved the fragile bones. Others argue the inhabitants devised funerary practices that left nothing to recover, perhaps dissolving the body in quicklime or scattering ash to the winds. Fringe theorists propose a more radical explanation, that the people of this vanished realm carried their dead away in secret, determined that no conqueror would ever claim them. Scholars remain divided. Were the bones erased by accident or deliberately withheld from history? The hillsides hold only unanswered questions. Why would entire nations choose silence over remembrance? What could compel a culture to hide every trace of their very flesh? Imagine the great settlement of Çatalhöyük, rising like a honeycomb across the Anatolian plain 9 millennia ago. Mud brick houses pressed wall against wall, ladders rising through roof holes, smoke curling from countless hearths into the sky. Archaeologists peeling back its layers discovered a pattern unlike any other. Beneath floors lay burials, generations interred under the very places where families ate, cooked, and slept. Yet among the countless rooms, a disturbing void repeats itself. Whole sequences of walls and hearths contain no burials at all, as though families lived for decades without ever leaving their dead behind. Some suggest these bodies were carried elsewhere, deposited in unknown sanctuaries beyond the settlement's walls. Others maintain that ritual demanded erasure, that remains were destroyed after temporary burial, dissolved in lime or released to the elements, leaving no bones for the archaeologist's spade. Fringe researchers insist that this absence was intentional, part of a broader cultural secret designed to conceal the fate of the dead from outsiders. Historians dispute whether this was reverence or suppression. Was Çatalhöyük a city where death was hidden, or where the dead themselves were meant to vanish? The impossible paradox remains unresolved. Why would one of the world's earliest great communities conceal half its people from history? Were these absences an act of devotion, a form of protection, or a silence imposed for reasons no record dares reveal? And if the bones of Çatalhöyük have vanished, what else might have been carried away into oblivion? High on a limestone ridge in southeastern Anatolia, great T-shaped pillars rise from the earth like the ribs of a buried colossus. Göbekli Tepe, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, carries on its weathered stones reliefs of animals that no longer roam these hills: lions, vultures, snakes, and strange faceless figures with folded arms. The sheer scale suggests generations of builders, thousands of hands laboring to raise these megaliths, carve their haunting forms, and bury them deliberately under tons of earth. Yet amid these circles of stone, another silence gnaws at the edges of the imagination. Where are the builders themselves? No cemeteries surround the site, no skeletons have been recovered, no village remains to house the workforce that shaped the stones. Scholars suggest the dead were taken to off-site sanctuaries, their burial grounds still undiscovered beneath Anatolia's shifting soil. Others claim the absence indicates that Göbekli Tepe was never a city, only a monumental gathering place visited seasonally by nomadic clans who carried their dead elsewhere. Fringe theorists whisper of deliberate concealment, of a culture that sought not to be remembered in flesh, but only in stone, leaving their legacy suspended between presence and absence. And yet the enigma endures. How could such a vast undertaking leave no trace of the human beings who made it possible? Why did their bones not remain as witnesses to their labor? Did they vanish into rituals too secret for archaeology, or did they choose to erase themselves from history entirely? A Across the mountains of north-central Anatolia, the ruins of Hattusa stretch like a shattered crown across stone ridges and valleys. Lion gates still stare with hollow eyes, colossal walls wind for miles across barren hills, and tablets etched with laws, myths, and treaties spill fragments of a once mighty empire. Yet beneath the city's layers of ash and rubble, an absence yawns wide, almost no graves. For a capital that governed an empire rivaling Egypt and Babylon, Hattusa should be thick with royal burials, soldiers' tombs, and common cemeteries. Instead, there is near silence, as if tens of thousands of people simply vanished without leaving a trace of their bones. Some suggest invaders desecrated and destroyed the burials during the empire's collapse, burning not only the city, but the remains of its inhabitants. Others claim the Hittites carried their dead away in secret, removing them before conquest could defile them. Fringe researchers whisper of a deliberate cultural choice: cremations, rituals of dissolution, or even burials in unmarked landscapes far from their capital to hide their most sacred dead. Scholars remain divided. Were these people erased by war or by their own hand? And yet the enigma endures. Why would a culture that carved treaties into clay erase its own flesh from the earth? Did they fear desecration, or were they bound by rights that demanded concealment? And if Hattusa's kings and people lie somewhere still undiscovered, what forgotten valley or riverbank cradles the bones of an empire? Beneath Anatolia's ridges lie limestone caverns, vast enough to hold entire villages, their chambers rich with fossils millions of years old, saber-toothed cats, mammoths, and prehistoric flora preserved in stone. These caves should have been natural tombs for ancient peoples, offering protection from the winds of time. And yet, despite millennia of human habitation across Anatolia, generations of cultures left almost no trace of themselves inside them. The paradox deepens when one considers the caves of Europe, where Paleolithic skeletons are found in abundance, or the caverns of the Levant, rich with Neanderthal remains. Here in Anatolia, the silence is deliberate, a choice made across centuries to avoid nature's safest crypts. Some maintain that the caves were considered taboo, places avoided for fear of spirits or curses. Others argue that remains once stored within were ritually removed or destroyed, leaving only the empty halls behind. Fringe theorists propose that the caves once held burials now deliberately concealed, sealed under rockfalls or flooded passages to keep the dead hidden from later intruders. Historians dispute the reasons, but the void remains. Why would generations turn away from such perfect sanctuaries of preservation? What beliefs or fears dictated this erasure? And if skeletons once rested within, who decided they must be taken away? And where are they now? In the plains of eastern Anatolia, the mound of Arslantepe rises like a scar from the earth. Excavations reveal a palace burned in antiquity, its chambers littered with weapons, thrones, and storerooms, still filled with goods. The fire-scorched walls black and collapsed roofs into embers that preserved the site like a time capsule. Yet among the relics of power, one absence cannot be ignored. There are no remains of the rulers, no bodies of servants caught in the flames, no skeletons of defenders or victims. For a blaze fierce enough to consume an entire palace, this silence is impossible. Some claim the inhabitants fled before the fire took hold, carrying their rulers' bodies and sacred figures away to safety. Others argue that after the flames subsided, survivors returned to retrieve the corpses, erasing every trace of human presence from the ruins. Fringe researchers insist the fire was no accident, but a deliberate act of ritual destruction, burning a palace as a symbolic burial, while the people themselves vanished into hidden tombs elsewhere. Scholars still debate, was this absence a matter of survival or a secret rite meant to protect the dead from prying eyes? And still the questions linger. Who lit the flames that consumed Arslantepe's palace? Why were no bones surrendered to the ash? And if bodies were deliberately erased, where were they taken, and what truths were sealed away with them? In the windswept villages of Anatolia, fireside stories have long whispered of a people who never left graves behind, whose bodies at death crumbled into dust before the eyes of the living. The folktales describe them as figures who could work stone, tame animals, and build walls, but who, at the moment of passing, dissolved into nothingness as if the earth itself reclaimed them. The paradox is immediate. Myths so often exaggerate, yet here they echo an archaeological reality. Cities and temples in Anatolia without the cemeteries that should surround them. Some believe these tales preserve a cultural memory of communities whose burial practices erased every physical trace, remembered only as those who turned to dust. Others argue the legends grew from encounters with abandoned ruins where not a single skeleton was found, and storytellers, unable to accept the silence, crafted beings who could vanish without bones. Fringe theorists propose a more disturbing angle, that some ancient population practiced deliberate dissolution of corpses through fire, lime, or unknown chemical rituals, leaving behind no body to rot or skeleton to endure. Scholars still debate whether such myths were allegories for mortality or veiled reports of practices once real. And yet the enigma endures. Why would a people's identity hinge on their body's refusal to persist? Were they feared, revered, or erased because their very flesh could not remain? And if these ghost people once lived, are we chasing only stories or shadows of a vanished truth hidden beneath the dust? Picture the rivers of Anatolia, swollen with spring floods carrying silt and secrets down toward the Black Sea. Along their banks once stood settlements where stone tools, pottery, and hearths remain, but graves do not. This has led some researchers to suggest that entire populations consigned their dead to the waters, casting bodies into currents that bore them away. The paradox here is chilling. While rivers preserve driftwood and clay, they swallow flesh and bone beneath layers of sediment, turning entire populations into invisible burials. Some claim this was a practical choice. Flowing water carried disease away from the living, preventing contamination. Others maintain it was ritual, a belief that the soul was ferried by rivers to the underworld, while the body was surrendered to the current. Fringe researchers insist it was concealment, a practice designed to ensure outsiders never discovered burial grounds, hiding the true scale of populations that once thrived here. Scholars remain divided. If thousands of skeletons lie beneath river deltas and seabeds, then Anatolia's missing dead are not absent, only unreachable, locked under centuries of mud. Still, the questions linger. Did the rivers of Anatolia carry away more than water? Did they carry entire civilizations? Is the Black Sea floor a vast drowned necropolis? And if so, what truths sleep under its silt, waiting to be disturbed by currents we have yet to follow? On the salt plains and dry basins of Anatolia, a darker possibility emerges. Some researchers suggest that mass disappearance without graves might not stem from myth or ritual, but from catastrophe. Epidemics could sweep through villages, leaving the dead too many and too dangerous to bury. In desperation, survivors may have disposed of bodies in ways that destroyed them, burning, lime pits, or burial in salt beds that absorbed and dissolved all trace of flesh. Others argue that high salinity soils might have corroded remains over millennia, leaving faint shadows instead of bones. Fringe theorists push further, claiming that systematic destruction of bodies was intentional, a ritual, cleansing meant to erase identity and memory along with physical remains. Historians dispute whether absence means erasure, or whether we have not yet looked in the right places. And yet, the paradox holds. Entire cultures known through their architecture and tools, but not through their dead. Still, the questions linger. Were these vanishings the work of plague that dissolved not just life but memory? Were they acts of survival, sacrificing the bodies of kin to protect the living? Or were they something more deliberate, a decision to strip their own presence from history so thoroughly that only silence would remain? Beneath the wind-blown ridges of Hisarlik, the city long called Troy lies in layered silence, its concentric walls rising like fossilized echoes of siege and fire. Excavators have uncovered charred beams, scattered weapons, storage jars still smelling faintly of ash. Yet what remains most unsettling is not what was found, but what was missing. For a city of such grandeur, where trade routes crossed and battles raged, the absence of burials, especially of children, forms an impossible paradox. Where did they go? Some believe infants and young ones were never interred in common cemeteries, but subjected to secret rituals hidden from later record, their bones offered to fire, water, or even birds of the sky. Others claim they were taken away during evacuations, carried to sanctuaries beyond Anatolia to protect bloodlines from annihilation. Fringe researchers whisper of darker practices, that selective sacrifice removed children from the archaeological story entirely, silenced before they could leave enduring trace. Scholars remain divided. Was it plague that thinned the young, with bodies disposed en masse far from the citadel, or is the absence an intentional erasure woven into cultural practice? And yet the mystery remains. Why do the stones of Troy preserve its battles, yet not its children? Were they sheltered in secrecy, consumed in ritual, or vanished into an unspoken exile? And if their bones are not beneath the soil, where do the missing children of Anatolia still lie hidden? Across Anatolia's ancient settlements, archaeologists sift through layers of conquest, finding skeletons that speak in accents not native to the soil. Greek hoplites lie entangled in collapsed gates, Persian warriors buried in hurried trenches, Scythian horsemen revealed by their distinctive gear. Yet the locals themselves, the farmers, artisans, and rulers whose hands built these cities, are conspicuously absent. This paradox unsettles even the most cautious scholar. A homeland where outsiders are buried, but its own people seem to have refused the earth. Some suggest they took their dead elsewhere, carrying remains into mountains or across seas, unwilling to let conquerors desecrate them. Others claim invaders intentionally erased local burials, clearing cemeteries and sanctuaries to overwrite identity with their own. Fringe theorists insist on something more deliberate, that Anatolia's peoples practiced forms of excarnation or dissolution, leaving no body behind, as a quiet rebellion against the permanence of conquest. Historians dispute whether this silence is a product of ritual, environmental loss, or an act of suppression by those who wrote the chronicles. Yet the enigma endures. Why do foreigners rest in Anatolia's soil while its own people remain invisible? Were they hidden by choice, destroyed by rivals, or preserved in ways we have yet to comprehend? And if the soil itself will not yield their voices, where must we turn to find the missing ancestors of these forgotten lands? Among Anatolia's scattered ruins, carved stones stare back with hollow eyes. Walls and stelae depict figures without heads, skeletal animals frozen mid-stride, and human shapes reduced to outlines as if their substance had already faded. The paradox is haunting. In a land where bodies refuse to remain, images of emptiness endure in stone. Some suggest these were warnings, visual codes left for future generations to remember a plague, famine, or ritual that erased entire groups. Others argue they were memorials, the only way a people could mark their dead without leaving vulnerable cemeteries to be desecrated. Fringe researchers propose that the carvings reflect self-portraiture of a culture already aware of its vanishing, that they saw themselves as ghost people long before the soil confirmed it. Scholars still debate whether the motifs are symbolic, artistic, or literal echoes of how Anatolians confronted their mortality. And yet the silence carved into their monuments may speak louder than missing bones, the choice to immortalize absence instead of presence. Still, the questions linger. Were these carvings grief-given form or declarations of defiance? Did they encode a ritual language now lost to us, or preserve a people who chose to leave no trace but shadows? And if stone remembers what flesh has forgotten, what truths lie within the eyes of those hollow figures staring back across time? In the 19th century, as European explorers and amateur archaeologists scoured Anatolia's hills, rumors spread of skeletons uncovered in strange conditions, remains described as towering giants, others as unusually small, still others bearing proportions that confounded easy classification. Some were said to have been unearthed from burial mounds eroded by rain, others from caves revealed by landslides, still others from construction sites where ancient soil gave way. Newspapers of the time carried fleeting accounts of bones measuring far beyond ordinary stature, yet within years those remains were reported lost in transit, misplaced in museum shipments, or dismissed by early scholars as curiosities unworthy of serious record. The paradox cuts sharp. In a land where bones are absent, the few that surfaced were not preserved, but vanished again into silence. Some suggest these were exaggerations of traveling showmen, skeletons distorted by disease or environment, later discredited to protect the discipline from sensationalism. Others claim they were real finds deliberately obscured, swept aside to preserve accepted narratives of history. Fringe researchers insist the pattern reflects more than accident, that anomalous remains threaten to reveal truths about vanished populations and were intentionally hidden by those controlling collections. Historians dispute whether these reports were mere fabrications, yet the repetition of disappearance from one lost specimen to another raises unsettling questions. Why do unusual bones appear only to vanish again? Who benefits when evidence is dismissed or misplaced? And if these were the remains of the ghost people of Anatolia, how many times has truth been buried twice, once in the earth and once in human hands? Step back and the puzzle sharpens into a chilling panorama, settlements that stretch across millennia, temples and fortresses standing mute, tools and art scattered in layers of soil, yet no bodies, no ancestors, no preserved faces. The paradox strikes harder when compared to neighboring lands. In Mesopotamia, cemeteries tell of dynasties and laborers alike. In Egypt, mummies immortalize even ordinary citizens. But in Anatolia, the land teems with evidence of life, while the people themselves are erased. Some suggest this erasure was natural, soil conditions, climate, or rituals that destroyed fragile remains before time could preserve them. Others argue it was no accident, a deliberate cultural choice to keep their dead unseen, a decision that extended even into how history remembered them. Fringe theorists propose an even sharper possibility, that these people were erased twice, first by their own design, then by conquerors who inherited their lands and silenced what was left. Scholars remain divided. Was the absence born of chance or of an intention to remove identity altogether? And yet the enigma endures. Did a kingdom truly choose to vanish even in death, erasing themselves so thoroughly that only stones remain? Was this silence an act of humility, secrecy, or defiance? And if they sought to leave no trace, why do their ruins still stand as a reminder, silent monuments to lives that refuse to be remembered? Across Anatolia, the story repeats. Göbekli Tepe's circles without builders, Çatalhöyük's homes without full burials, Hattus's archives without graves, Troy's citadel without children, caves that yield no skeletons, palaces burned without victims, carvings of hollow figures watching without eyes. Each site delivers evidence of presence, yet withholds the bodies of the people who should fill its story. The paradox becomes unbearable. An entire landscape filled with life's remains, tools, walls, myths, and wonders, yet missing the people themselves. Some believe this silence hides plagues or disasters that destroyed the dead beyond recognition. Others suggest elaborate rituals, scattered or dissolved bodies to protect them from desecration. Fringe researchers whisper of erasures engineered by design, a cultural pact to vanish not just in death, but in memory, ensuring that identity itself could not be controlled by outsiders. Scholars still debate whether the void is accident or intention, natural decay or deliberate concealment, and yet the mystery remains, stretching across centuries and ruins alike. Was Anatolia home to a kingdom that chose absence as its legacy? Were its people erased by catastrophe or by their own hand? Or does a deeper truth hide beneath the stones, that history itself is haunted by ghost peoples, civilizations that walk its edges unseen, leaving only silence where their bones should lie? Still, the questions linger. How many more kingdoms are missing from our chronicles? How many more voices were silenced before they could be recorded? And if these people erased even their dead, what warning or what secret Were they trying to leave for us, hidden in the silence beneath the stones?